My name is Nathaniel Cross, and I'm 52 years old. For nearly 2 decades, I've run Crosstech Security, a company my father founded in Austin, Texas. We specialize in high-level cybersecurity for defense contractors, government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies. Our reputation across the South has been built on one principle: trust. My father used to say, "In our business, trust is everything. You lose that, and you've lost it all." I believed I had built a life that honored those words. A thriving business, a wife of 15 years, and 2 children who were the center of my world. My wife's name was Caroline. She had a quiet elegance about her, the kind that made her seem unshakable in any social setting. I always admired that, because I've always been more of an observer than a talker. Our kids, Lucas and Sophie, 17 and 15, were growing into strong, intelligent young adults. At least, that's how it seemed from my side of the table. But sometimes, life has a way of showing you just how blind trust can make you. When my father passed away after an 8-month battle with pancreatic cancer, it felt like a chapter of my life had been ripped from its spine. He wasn't just my father. He was my mentor, my partner, the man who taught me everything I knew about business, loyalty, and vigilance. His loss cut me deeper than I thought possible. The funeral was held on a gray Saturday morning at Oakwood Cemetery in the heart of Austin. The skies hung low, heavy with rain that never quite fell, as if nature itself was holding back its grief. The city's business and tech community came out in force to pay respects. My father had mentored dozens of young entrepreneurs, many of whom now ran companies of their own. Defense officials, industry partners, even a few politicians, we had them all in attendance. I remember standing by the graveside, my black suit pressed tight against me in the humid Texas air, watching the casket being lowered. I felt the weight of legacy pressing down on me in that moment. That's when Caroline approached me, holding an envelope in her manicured hand. Her timing couldn't have been worse. But looking back, I realized that was the point. She wanted maximum impact. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice steady, almost businesslike, "I need you to look at this." I opened the envelope, and my blood turned to ice. Divorce papers. Right there, with the dirt still clinging to my shoes from my father's grave. I looked at her, my throat dry. "You're serious? Right now?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The timing isn't ideal, but it has to be done. Your father's will names me as a beneficiary to certain family assets as the surviving daughter-in-law. My attorney says it's ironclad." Before I could respond, I felt a presence behind me. Lucas and Sophie, my children, stood shoulder to shoulder with their mother. But their expressions weren't what I expected. There was no grief for their grandfather, no concern for me. Instead, there was a coldness, an almost practiced disdain. "Dad, we've made our decision," Lucas said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "We're changing our last name to Hayes. Mom's new partner has offered us opportunities you never could." Sophie nodded, her face unreadable. "We're moving in with Mom and Daniel. He understands us better than you ever did." Daniel Hayes, my business partner of 8 years. The man I'd trusted with the inner workings of Crosstech Security. I stood there, surrounded by mourners, my family unraveling in front of me. But what I felt wasn't rage. Anger is hot, reckless, destructive. No, what I felt was colder. Methodical. The same mindset that had allowed me to anticipate security breaches before they happened was now locking onto the betrayal unfolding in real time. What Caroline and Daniel didn't know was that I'd been watching this develop for months. Running a cybersecurity company gives you instincts. You notice patterns, anomalies, subtle shifts in behavior. Caroline's patterns had changed earlier that year. She angled her phone away when texting. She claimed late nights at her consulting job, but her office said she'd left hours earlier. Credit card charges appeared for restaurants I'd never been to, spas she never mentioned. And Daniel, he'd started asking questions that set off alarms. Casual remarks about family trusts. Inquiries into how much liquid capital we had tied up in certain properties. Observations about my father's investments, worded like innocent curiosity but probing too deep. Then came the flagged login attempts. Our IT department alerted me that someone had accessed sensitive files outside normal business hours. Daniel's credentials were used, but the times didn't align with his office schedule. That's when I knew this wasn't paranoia, it was a setup. I hired a private investigator, Marcus Bell, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate espionage. Within 2 weeks, Marcus had photographs of Caroline and Daniel at the Driscoll Hotel downtown. Meeting there once could be written off. But 3 times in the span of 2 months? That was a pattern. But the real revelation came when Marcus dug deeper. Caroline and Daniel had been meeting with a probate attorney, a woman known in legal circles for finding loopholes in inheritance law. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting a hostile takeover. Caroline intended to leverage my father's will to gain access to family assets, while Daniel positioned himself to assume control of Crosstech. They thought they were clever. They thought they could blindside me. The cruelest part wasn't even their plan, it was the manipulation of Lucas and Sophie. Daniel played the role of the cool stepdad figure, showering them with gifts, promising cars on their 18th birthdays, whispers of Ivy League schools, European trips, and trust funds. He'd painted me as old-fashioned, stingy, incapable of understanding their modern needs. I heard it all. Recorded conversations, intercepted texts. I built a file thicker than a legal brief. And I waited. Because timing is everything. The funeral scene was my breaking point, but not in the way Caroline expected. She thought she was pushing me into a corner. What she didn't realize was that I had already constructed the walls around her. As I stood there, divorce papers in hand, children looking at me with contempt, I made a silent promise. Not to lash out. Not to make a scene. But to take everything they thought they had secured and dismantle it piece by piece. Patience. Preparation. Precision. That's how you catch thieves. And my wife and business partner were about to learn that lesson the hard way. After the funeral, I didn't go home. Caroline and the kids left in Daniel's Mercedes, a black S-Class that gleamed under the cemetery's oak trees like some kind of victory flag. I stayed behind, letting the crowd disperse until the only people left were the groundskeepers folding chairs into neat stacks. I stood there staring at the fresh dirt on my father's grave, the divorce papers heavy in my hand. He had warned me years ago, in that gravelly voice of his, "Son, betrayal never comes from your enemies. It comes from the ones you trust most." He'd been right. On the drive back to my house in Westlake Hills, the decision solidified in my mind. I wasn't going to rage. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to confront Caroline or Daniel head-on. That's what they wanted, an emotional reaction they could weaponize in court or in business negotiations. No. I was going to do what I did best, collect data, analyze patterns, and let the truth destroy them. The following Monday, I called Marcus Bell, the private investigator I'd hired months before. He was ex-FBI cybercrimes, the kind of man who could dismantle a fraudulent corporation with nothing more than a laptop and a subpoena. We met at a diner off I-35, the kind of place where no one cared about who sat in the corner booth. "You were right," Marcus said as he slid a manila envelope across the table. His coffee was black, his eyes sharper than a blade. "They've accelerated their timeline since your father's passing." Inside the envelope were photographs. Caroline and Daniel walking into the office of Victoria Ramos, a probate lawyer known for manipulating estate loopholes. There were also screenshots of emails Daniel had sent from his company-issued laptop, encrypted, but no match for Marcus. One stood out. A message from Daniel to Caroline. "Once Nathaniel's father is gone, we move fast. With your status as beneficiary and the kids on our side, the courts will lean in our favor. I'll handle the financials. You just play the grieving widow." I clenched my jaw, but kept my face still. Marcus leaned closer. "There's more. Daniel's been siphoning money. Not enough to raise alarms, but it adds up. Fake consulting contracts, inflated invoices, even a couple of ghost employees on payroll. Total so far is about $600,000. I nodded slowly. "And the kids?" "Classic grooming. He's throwing money at them, new phones, shopping trips, promises of cars and college funds. He's poisoning the well, Nathaniel. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late." For a moment, I felt the weight of it pressing on me. My children, my blood, being turned against me like pawns in someone else's game. It was the kind of pain you can't put into words. But again, I forced the emotions down. Emotions cloud judgment. Judgment is everything. What do you want to do? Marcus asked. I looked him dead in the eye. We wait. We watch. And when they make their move, we'll be ready. The waiting was the hardest part. At home, Caroline became more brazen. She stopped pretending altogether. She'd leave the house at all hours, offering half-hearted excuses. Lucas and Sophie followed her lead, treating me with a mix of contempt and pity, like I was some relic of a man they no longer respected. One night, Lucas came into the kitchen while I was pouring myself a glass of water. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. Daniel says you're too rigid, he said. That you hold this family back because you're afraid to spend money. He says when he's running things, we'll finally be able to live the way we should. I studied my son's face, searching for the boy who used to sit on my shoulders during 4th of July fireworks. But all I saw was arrogance borrowed from a man who wasn't his father. Lucas, I said quietly, when someone promises you the world, ask yourself why. Nothing in life is free. He rolled his eyes. That's just fear talking. Then he walked out, shaking his head. Sophie wasn't much better. She'd started dressing differently, carrying designer handbags that I knew Caroline couldn't afford on her own. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone telling a friend that Mom and Daniel actually care about our future, unlike Dad. Every word cut like a knife, but I swallowed it down. At the office, Daniel played his part well. He'd waltz into meetings with his easy charm, slapping backs, cracking jokes, acting as if he didn't have a noose tightening around his neck. But his confidence betrayed him in small ways. He asked more questions about asset allocation. He dropped comments about transition plans and next-gen leadership. It was like watching a man rehearse for a role he thought he already owned. Meanwhile, I was quietly reinforcing the walls. First, I restructured my personal finances. Accounts were moved, trusts were shielded, and assets were placed beyond Caroline's reach. Patricia Huang, my longtime attorney, created legal firewalls so intricate that even Victoria Ramos would struggle to untangle them. Second, I implemented new monitoring systems inside CrossTech. Every login, every access attempt, every financial transaction, tracked and logged. If Daniel so much as sneezed near an unauthorized file, I'd know. Finally, I began documenting everything. Every suspicious meeting, every shady contract, every overheard conversation. Evidence piled up like ammunition in a war chest. Patience. Preparation. Precision. The breakthrough came one late evening in July. I was in my office when our CFO, Denise Alvarez, knocked gently and stepped inside. She looked uneasy. Mr. Cross, I don't mean to overstep, but there have been some irregularities. She laid down a folder of invoices. Several consulting contracts authorized by Daniel. All of them to shell companies with no real address, just P.O. boxes and vague descriptions. How much? I asked. About $200,000 in the last quarter. Small enough to hide in the overall budget, but consistent. Someone's bleeding us slowly. I met her eyes. Thank you, Denise. Don't mention this to anyone else. Not yet. She nodded, relief washing over her face. She trusted me. That was worth more than gold. By August, Marcus returned with even more damning evidence. Photographs of Caroline and Daniel at the Four Seasons, laughing over champagne. Recordings of phone calls where they discussed my outdated ways, and how easy it'll be to push him out once the will is leveraged. But the worst was an email exchange between Caroline and Victoria Ramos. Once Nathaniel signs the divorce papers, we can argue that I'm entitled to half of his shares, plus my portion of the trust. Daniel can step in as interim CEO. With the kids supporting me, the optics will favor our side. Perfect, Victoria replied. Courts always lean toward preserving family stability. He won't stand a chance. They thought they were building an airtight case. What they didn't know was that every keystroke, every call, every meeting was already being catalogued against them. I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. To stop them now would be to waste the perfect trap. The hardest part was sitting across from Caroline at dinner, pretending not to know. watching her smile faintly as if she still wore the mask of a wife, when I knew she was sharpening the knife behind her back. Listening to my children dismiss me, not realizing they were being used as pawns in a game that could destroy the very foundation of the life they took for granted. But patience, I reminded myself. Patience and preparation. The best hackers reveal themselves when they think they're safe. And Caroline and Daniel were getting careless. It was only a matter of time before they made their move. And when they did, I'd be ready. It happened on a Thursday morning in late September. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with unseen activity. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, the smell of burnt coffee drifted through the air. On the surface, it was just another day at Crosstech Industries. But I knew better. At exactly 9:43 a.m., my phone buzzed with a secure alert from the monitoring system I'd installed months ago. A wire transfer attempt, $2.3 million, routed from one of our corporate reserve accounts to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. The authorization came from Daniel Holt's credentials. He had finally taken the bait. I sat perfectly still in my chair, staring at the notification. A lesser man might have stormed out of his office, ready to drag Daniel by the collar. But anger was messy, and I preferred elegance. Instead, I simply picked up the phone and called Patricia Huang, my attorney. "It's time," I said. Her response was immediate. "I'll mobilize the forensic team. Sit tight. Do not intervene yet." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching the trap close in my mind like a steel jaw. By noon, Patricia arrived with 2 associates and an IT forensic specialist. They worked quietly in my office, mirroring the transaction logs, tracing IP addresses, and securing evidence. Every keystroke Daniel had entered, every attempt to cover his tracks, it was all preserved in immutable detail. "This is airtight," Patricia murmured as she flipped through the reports. "He can't claim it was an accident. He initiated it, he approved it, and he tried to mask it with bogus invoices. It's fraud, plain and simple." "Good," I said. "Now we let him sweat." That afternoon, I walked into the executive conference room where Daniel sat surrounded by department heads, laughing at some joke. He looked up as I entered, his grin smug, his posture relaxed, like a man who thought he owned the room. "Nathaniel," he said, gesturing toward an empty chair. "We were just discussing growth projections for Q4. You should hear Denise's numbers. They're promising." I smiled faintly and took my seat at the head of the table. "That's good to hear. Growth is always promising." For the next hour, I let the meeting proceed as if nothing were wrong. I asked questions, offered input, even chuckled at the right moments. All the while, Daniel smirked across the table, convinced I was already beaten. When the meeting adjourned, I stood and looked directly at him. "Daniel, would you join me in my office for a moment?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Of course." Once the door closed behind us, the air shifted. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded, pretending to be casual. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I slid a printed transaction report across the desk toward him. "This is—" He glanced down at the paper, then back up at me, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure what this is supposed to mean." "It means," I said calmly, "that you attempted to steal from this company today. $2.3 million, to be exact. Offshore account. Cayman Islands." For the first time, the mask slipped. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he quickly covered it with a smirk. "That's absurd. You must be mistaken." "I don't make mistakes," I replied evenly. "Everything is logged. Every keystroke. Every approval. We have your credentials, your device ID, your IP address. The evidence is overwhelming." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Even if that were true, you can't prove intent. For all you know, it was a clerical error." I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady as steel. "Daniel, when you created fake consulting firms, when you laundered funds through shell accounts, when you colluded with my wife to seize control of my family's legacy, you made your intent crystal clear." His face went pale. "You've been sloppy," I continued. "Emails, phone calls, meetings at the Four Seasons. You thought no one was watching. But I was. From the moment I sensed betrayal, I documented everything. And now the net has closed." For the first time, Daniel lost his composure. He slammed his palm against my desk. "You think you can scare me? Caroline's on my side. Your kids are on my side. The courts will back us. You can't win this." I met his fury with silence, then said softly, "The courts don't back thieves. And neither does the FBI." Right on cue, there was a knock at the door. Patricia stepped in, followed by two men in suits. Federal agents. Daniel froze. "Mr. Holt," one agent said, producing a badge. "You're under investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. We'll need you to come with us." The color drained from Daniel's face. "This is a mistake," he sputtered. "Nathaniel set me up. He forged this." The agent shook his head. "We've traced everything directly to your devices. You'll have an opportunity to explain yourself downtown." They cuffed him right there in my office. As they led him out, his eyes locked on mine, filled with hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. But it was. Caroline didn't take long to show up at my house that evening, fury etched into every line of her face. She stormed into the living room, waving her phone. "What the hell did you do to him?" she demanded. I looked up from the leather-bound journal I'd been writing in. "I didn't do anything, Caroline. Daniel did this to himself." "You set him up," she spat. "You've always been jealous of him, threatened by him. That's why you're trying to destroy him." I closed the journal calmly. "No. I simply let him destroy himself. And now you'll face the consequences too." She blinked, thrown off. "What are you talking about?" I reached for a folder on the coffee table and slid it toward her. Inside were printed emails, her correspondence with Victoria Ramos, the lawyer. Detailed discussions about manipulating the estate, coercing the children, and stripping me of my shares. Her face drained of color as she flipped through the pages. "The FBI already has copies," I said quietly. "It's only a matter of time before they come knocking on your door as well." Caroline's hands shook. "You wouldn't." I held her gaze, my voice calm, steady. "You betrayed me. You betrayed this family. There are consequences for that." For the first time in months, she looked uncertain. The mask of confidence cracked, revealing the fear beneath. The next morning, Lucas and Sophie confronted me in the kitchen. "Mom says you had Daniel arrested," Sophie said, her voice trembling. I nodded. "That's correct." "Why?" Lucas demanded. "He was trying to help us. He was trying to secure our future." "Your future?" I echoed, my tone still. "Do you think a man who steals from his own company, who manipulates his business partner's children against their father, cares about your future? He was using you, both of you, as leverage." They exchanged uncertain glances. Doubt flickered in their eyes for the first time. "When the truth comes out," I said, "you'll see who Daniel really is. And you'll see what your mother allowed herself to become." I left them standing there in silence, the first cracks forming in the walls Caroline and Daniel had built around them. That weekend, headlines exploded across Texas business news outlets. Crosstech COO arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Family feud leads to corporate betrayal. West Lake Hills heiress tied to financial scandal. The story spread like wildfire. Investors panicked at first, but once they saw the company's stability under my leadership, the tide turned. Calls came in from partners, expressing support. Employees rallied, grateful that I had acted decisively to protect the company. Caroline, meanwhile, withdrew from public view. She stopped answering calls, stopped showing up at events. The whispers grew louder, the judgment harsher. Her once pristine image was unraveling thread by thread. And the children, slowly, painfully, began to see the truth. But this was not the end. Not yet. Daniel was in custody, yes, but Caroline's role had not yet been fully exposed. The courts still had to decide on the divorce, the estate, and the company. And my children still had to choose where their loyalties lay. I wasn't finished. Not until every last piece of this betrayal was brought into the light. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and dust, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my attorney Patricia beside me, while Caroline occupied the opposite side. She wore black, as if mourning, her eyes rimmed with carefully placed tears. To anyone who didn't know better, she might have looked like a grieving widow wronged by a cruel husband. But I knew better. And so did the evidence. Daniel had already been arraigned weeks earlier. The FBI's case was overwhelming: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. His bail had been set so high that even his silver tongue couldn't talk him out of the cell he now called home. His trial would take months, maybe longer. In the meantime, Caroline's own role had come under scrutiny. That's what brought us here today: the matter of divorce, division of assets, and the custody of Lucas and Sophie. The judge, a stern woman named Evelyn Marks, entered the room. Everyone stood, then sat as she took her seat. "Let's proceed," she said briskly. Patricia laid out the evidence methodically. The emails between Caroline and Victoria Ramos. The recordings Marcus had captured of her meetings with Daniel. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers tied to her personal accounts. Every document was a nail in the coffin of Caroline's credibility. Caroline's attorney tried to spin it differently. He painted her as a victim of Daniel's manipulation, a woman swept up in his schemes, blinded by grief and pressure. She dabbed her eyes at the right moments, her voice quivering when she spoke of just wanting what was best for my children. I sat silent through it all, my face unreadable. Let her play her part. The truth didn't need theatrics, it had weight of its own. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "My wife betrayed me," I said evenly. "Not just as a husband, but as a father and as a steward of this family's legacy. She conspired with another man to defraud this company, this family, and this court. I am not here for revenge. I am here for accountability." The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the courtroom clock. Judge Marks studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." The proceedings dragged on for weeks. Witnesses came and went, employees, accountants, even Lucas and Sophie. That was the hardest part. Lucas testified first, his eyes darting between me and his mother. Daniel said Dad was too controlling. He said Mom deserved more. I believed him. His voice cracked on the last word. Patricia leaned forward gently. "And now?" Lucas swallowed hard. "Now I see he was lying. Dad never yelled. He never fought. He just waited. And Daniel dug his own grave." He looked down, shame clouding his young face. Sophie followed, her testimony softer but no less powerful. "I thought Mom was protecting us. But she wasn't. She was protecting Daniel. I see that now." Caroline's composure faltered then, her mask slipping as tears she hadn't rehearsed finally fell. She reached for Sophie's hand, but my daughter pulled away. It was over, even if she didn't know it yet. In late November, the judgment came. Caroline was found complicit in Daniel's schemes, not the mastermind, but an active participant. She was stripped of any claim to Crosstech, denied access to family trusts, and granted only supervised visitation rights with Lucas and Sophie. The divorce was finalized that same day. Assets divided, accounts settled, signatures inked. With the stroke of a pen, 20 years of marriage dissolved into a legal footnote. As for Daniel, federal prosecutors prepared to make an example of him. Wire fraud carried a heavy sentence, and with the added weight of conspiracy and embezzlement, he faced decades behind bars. The last I heard, he had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for a lighter sentence, but it wouldn't save him from spending the prime of his life in a concrete cage. In December, I stood once again at my father's grave. The Texas winter was mild, a cold wind sweeping through the cemetery as the sun dipped low. Lucas and Sophie stood beside me, quieter now, humbled by what they had seen. Lucas cleared his throat. "Dad, I'm sorry. For everything I said. For believing him." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're young. You wanted to believe in something easy. That's not a crime. What matters is what you've learned." Sophie slipped her hand into mine. "We just want to move forward. With you." I nodded, my heart steady. "Then that's what we'll do." Back at Crosstech, things changed. The scandal had rattled investors, but once the truth came out, confidence surged back. New contracts rolled in, partnerships strengthened. Employees worked with a renewed sense of loyalty, knowing I had protected the company from rot within. I promoted Denise Alvarez to CFO, her diligence proving invaluable. Marcus stayed on as a consultant, monitoring systems quietly, a shadow ensuring no one would ever try such treachery again. And I began training Lucas and Sophie, not just in the mechanics of business, but in the principles that my father had drilled into me. Integrity, patience, discipline. Because legacy isn't built on money or power. It's built on character. As for Caroline, she vanished from public life. Occasionally, I heard whispers of her living in a rented condo downtown, struggling to pay bills, her once proud social circle abandoning her. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Consequences are punishment enough when you bring them on yourself. The last time I saw her was outside the courthouse months later. She approached me, her face worn, her eyes hollow. "Was it worth it?" she asked bitterly. I studied her, this woman I had once loved, who had once been my partner in everything. "It wasn't about worth," I said quietly. "It was about truth. And truth always wins, eventually." She looked away, defeated, and walked off into the crowd. That night, I sat alone in my study, a glass of bourbon in my hand. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of Austin traffic beyond the hills. I thought of my father's words again, "Betrayal never comes from your enemies." He had been right. But what he hadn't told me, what I had to learn myself, was that betrayal doesn't have to break you. If you hold steady, if you let patience do its work, betrayal destroys itself. I raised my glass to the silence. Not in celebration, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. The storm had passed. The legacy endured. And I had never once raised my voice. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to receive alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.